Hilary and John, if I can now perhaps hand over to you for the introductions.
Thanks very much, Tracy, and greetings, everyone. It is indeed great that so many of you are online and from so many diverse areas of the world. You will have sussed that I'm Hilary, and I work as a systemic team coach and have done for a number of years. And together with John and with Peter Hawkins, we founded the Systemic Team Coaching suite of programs back in 2010. So we're teaching on the systemic team coaching programs. John.
Yes, as you say, I met with Peter in 2010, thinking about what's the next step. How do we move from individual coaching to working in teams? And we spent quite a lot of time thinking and creating then the first systemic team coaching diploma as a way of the ideas and the 5 disciplines model that Peter had created. And he was in that point writing his first version of a leadership team coaching. So this is the emergence from that, and Hilary and I working together over these years to establish systemic team coaching and our 2 programs, Systemic Certificate and the diploma.
Thanks, John. So today we are going to spend, John and I are going to spend about 20 minutes talking together about the book and how we've, the different areas are focused really compared to the first edition. And then we are very happy to have 2 people from across the world who have reviewed the book and have used the first edition. Then we're going to open the call to your questions. So as Tracy said, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll keep a track of that, but we will definitely open mics about 40 minutes into the call. So I think we're going to turn the slides off now. Yes. And hopefully we, John and I, can be pinpointed so that we can have this conversation. And again, if everyone can keep their mics off for this, that would be great. So while we're hopefully being pinpointed, John, so we talked about the fact that we first came together in 2009, 2010, to found the Systemic Team Coaching Diploma initially. And then it was really around 2017, wasn't it, that we decided to write our first book as a companion to the Systemic Team Coaching Certificate. We wanted to really record the foundational principles of systemic team coaching, and we wanted it to be a handy manual, a kind of how down to earth how to do as far as we could, to complement Peter's book on leadership team coaching.
Yeah, I think that was it. Peter was writing systemic leadership team coaching at the time, and he's got a very deep philosophical perspective. And what we felt was needed was something that was more straightforward, more concise, more specific, with more direct examples. So we've really worked quite hard to make it straightforward and accessible and connected to the real practice of systemic team coaching.
Then, of course, since 2018, a lot has happened in the world, and we decided probably a year and a half ago that we needed to take stock. Of course, the pandemic brought many changes, fundamental changes to the whole of life, but of course, for systemic team coaches and team coaches generally, the requirement to work online, and of course the opportunity to work online. And of course, in that period as well, we've been able to take stock of how is the book landing and how is the teaching of systemic team coaching landing, both in our programs and of course in all of the virtual programs that we've been involved in running with Peter through coaching.com. And feeling, I think one of the things that we thought was an area that we wanted to take stock of and emphasize more was the whole systemic nature of systemic team coaching.
Hmm.
What's your experience? What are your thoughts, John?
Well, yes, the big contribution that we're making with systemic team coaching is understanding how stakeholders are a massive influence, our emphasis throughout both books, and more so in the second edition is looking at how do we engage with our stakeholders. Early on in developing the process, we experienced a lot of reluctance for team leaders to engage the team development process because it's a little bit scary connecting up with your boss, with your suppliers, your direct reports. And we developed the Team Connect 360 tool, but there was a huge care and concern about not opening the experience too widely. Since then, of course, as we've become more familiar with that, and organizations and teams are understanding more about the systemic nature, we're finding that the teams and team leaders are much more ready to engage with the wider teams, and we'll ask Yvonne and Madeline about their experience of doing that, and indeed interested in hearing from everybody else about that experience. But it's been I think a huge transition way back in 2010 when it was a new idea. It's now the whole systemic notion has really taken root, and we're understanding those implications.
The importance of taking that systemic view right from the word go. You know, from the scoping conversation, the type of questions you ask, not just about the team, but about the wider context, about what's going on, about what the pressures are, and to state confidently, I work as a systemic team coach, and therefore I am going to bring this outside-in view, and keeping that dimension there all the time, because I do find a number of team coaches get inevitably pulled into the interpersonal dynamics of the team, which are critical, but unless we look at them through the wider angle lens of the wider system, we may end up getting caught into interpersonal tensions without understanding how the system's impacting on those. So it's kind of requires quite a lot of discipline right from the word go, I think.
Which is, you know, the model is called the 5 disciplines. In a sense, because of that. And there are plenty of fantastic books about the interpersonal dynamics in our 5 disciplines model. This is the co-creating 1/5 of the process, the co-creating, and then also the dynamics in terms of relationships with the stakeholders. And that is an incredibly important area. And in our book, we don't take a lot of time and a lot of space to talk about the multiple tools and techniques that are available there. This is where these other books are incredibly useful. But our focus is putting the relationship part of the team relationship part in context with its task. What's the team there to do? And then how does it connect with its stakeholders? And, you know, we in the book explain a lot about how to manage the movement through the 5 disciplines.
And what do you think, how do you think systemic team coaching has changed as a result of the pandemic and beyond?
Yes, absolutely fascinating. And there are lots of challenges and difficulties. I was just with a team yesterday, and people will switch off their camera, and they say, well, why have you switched off your camera? It's like you've walked out of the room. And, you know, the ability to get easily distracted by emails pinging in. I think the difficulty I experience is not so much the connection, because we can get to quite a profound level just by people participants, team members discussing the difficult areas in their relationships and what's happening with stakeholders. It's the potential distraction that can happen when you're sitting in a room. You can see, well, it's harder to see the fact that people have drifted off in their heads. But here, some people are either blatantly working online, and it's having to set a protocol at the beginning and then just running with it.
Yes, a bit really encouraging absolute transparency about how people are attending, or indeed how they're not. But I think that it's really, sorry.
Can I just add, but the one thing that I find amazing is the ability to drop in to, we'll talk about it in a minute, business as usual meetings. Yeah. That ability, because previously you'd turn up at a business meeting to observe it, and your presence would change the dynamics substantially. Yeah. I always find that the teams were much more polite when I was present than they were from the stories I'd heard. But here, virtually, you can drop in and even have your camera off and really be like a fly on the wall, and find then structures for intervening. And I find that so much more powerful and running more effectively to drop in. And of course, teams are functioning virtually more often, so that's easier as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the major opportunities that's arisen with more virtual working, that we can design team coaching interventions in smaller bursts, which are more integrated into the daily weekly work of the team. And while sometimes that can feel constrained because maybe they're less inclined to do longer offsites or away days, it can be much easier to integrate the learning of team coaching into the work of the team. And in the book, we talk a lot more about that activity of the team coach, but also how we undertake timeouts and what do we need from ourselves, our own courage, our own presence to take timeouts, and notice the learning moments that we can help the team to experience and then embed in their normal working.
Indeed. As I reflect now, since COVID, I notice that my practice has moved more towards extended business as usual meetings.
Yes.
And the sense of weaving in the team coaching into that, rather than the traditional workshops, the away days, 2 days away, because that has not been feasible during COVID. We've got used to working in, as you're saying, in shorter bursts. And I realize that when I think about it, I've done far fewer single days, and even then it's even shorter than that, 4 or 5 hours. And I find that within my own business, AOEC, that when we have meetings, it's like half-day meetings or shorter meetings, the screen time problem, and finding those much more effective.
Yeah. Although I have had some fantastic one-day workshops where we've mixed on-screen, off-screen, embodiment exercises, intellectual exercises. You can do it, just have to think about it. And before we ask Madeline and Yvonne to join, I just wanted to talk maybe a bit about the greater emphasis we've placed in this second edition on we talk about systemic thinking, doing and being, and we've thought more about the whole area of systemic being, how we need to really know ourselves and where we come from in order to know how we come across and work across the difference with the team. We need to really understand our own triggers and our own patterns, so that in the crossfire of challenging dynamics and the anxiety that can inevitably come up when we're coaching a team, we are centered, we know what's ours, and we know what we're picking up from the system. And then we have the courage to name what we're observing and what we're experiencing in order to help the team have a different type of conversation. And really all of that on a systemic basis, being aware of how we react to certain cultures and organization patterns. These are all very important areas for growth.
Yes, yes, indeed. How the whole section that we have, what we call the facilitation map, is about how we use ourselves, our own internal response, our somatic resonance, our reactions to the team as valid data.
Yes.
And that takes quite a lot of practice. On the Systemic Team Coaching Certificate Program, we are doing this in an intensive period, so really getting to the understanding of the process and how to use the tools and techniques. On the diploma, it takes us over a year. It's much more about who are we, how do we show up as the systemic team coach, and building an internal confidence to use ourselves and understand this idea of parallel process. How does the dynamics between our internal dynamics reflect on what's happening with the team and the team with their wider organization? So this is a process we talk about and get very excited about. I would like to talk further, but
yes, and the dynamic between us and our co-coach and how we build those kinds of robust relationships.
Maybe we'll get some questions on that we can delve into.
Indeed. So do you think we should then invite Yvonne and Madeline into this conversation?
Indeed, yes. So our next step is inviting Madeline, who I've known for years, based in Nairobi, and here with us today to talk about her experience of using our book, and Yvonne Ng from Singapore, who had the pleasure of working with her and her team last year, and look forward again this coming year. Both have very generously talked about the impact of the book for us in the reviews, but here to say a little bit more. So can we bring Yvonne and Madeline in, please?
Thanks, John. Thanks, Hilary. So my name is Madeline Dunford, and I run a firm called Career Connections, which covers East and actually most of Sub-Saharan Africa in different service lines. An integrated talent consulting firm, but important for this conversation is we've been a partner of the Academy of Executive Coaching for 14 years. And I have indeed myself specialized in the area of systemic team coaching, and I'm a faculty in that area for the Academy. So nice to be with you today, Yvonne.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Yvonne from Singapore. Currently I'm working as an internal, if you may say, internal OD to a public healthcare institution in Singapore. So we do organization development and people development, leadership development as well. And team coaching is very much an integral part of the work that we do. So that's my introduction. Back to you, Madeline.
Great. I think Hilary's question was, how is it useful? Having read both this book and Peter Hawkins's work, I would say the simplicity of the book is what strikes you first, that it's really a pragmatic and very practical guide. It kind of demystifies a lot of things and helps you position both systemic team coaching for your potential clients. So how would you even explain it? What would the benefits be? Who are you likely to engage with right from the offset of this process? But also how to position yourself and how to develop yourself as a systemic team coach. And it allows you a lot of flexibility. So a lot of great tools and ideas, but then I think an encouragement for you to design your own approach is the way that I saw the book. And also flexibility in how you want to deploy your coaching. It's, as you say, business as usual, or do you want to retreats, or do you want to have sessions? So finding your own way, but a good toolkit to start. What about you, Yvonne?
Okay, yeah, I fully agree with you. The book is simple and yet offers a step-by-step guide on how do you go about the whole team coaching process, you know, from contracting to designing, to diagnostic and all that. And so I use it very much as a guide for myself when I first started. And in fact, I got a book for my whole team. So it helps to align us. We use the same language. So it was a great guide for my team. Yeah. So thanks, Hilary and John, for the book.
Thank you. Do you have a particular example? Would you have an example of what you've applied or how you've applied it with a team that you've worked with, just to illustrate?
If I may start, so previously I have been working very much on individual teams, but recently from January this year, because our organization, we wanted to do a little bit of a reorganization. So wanted to bring different teams together to form a larger enterprise. And then I had to, like use the 5 disciplines to help them think through what the stakeholders may be thinking, expecting from them, and how do they want to organize themselves as a team? What are their common goals that they're working towards? And so I'm actually in the process of going through 4 half-day retreats with them before on 13 April, we'll land with everybody coming together and having that conversation to work out what may be some of the tensions that we're feeling. And so I literally took points from the book and, take those questions and ask them and design different segments around that. So it was really useful. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's very good to hear. You know, it's so, we were saying earlier, John, it's so important that team coaches don't just see the internal of the team as the end result. Often I find a team coach will say, well, they're all now really working well together. And I will say, in the service of what? Well, so that they can deliver their task better. In the service of what? The most important thing is, how is this team leading, creating change in the outside world? How is it interacting with other teams? If it's not, if you haven't attended to that, you've just created a microcosm.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's lovely to hear you doing that work between teams, Yvonne.
And I guess building on that, Hilary, where I found the book very useful is to have a lot of thoughtful questions that you can engage the team's critical stakeholders with, or in my process, encourage the team members to go and engage their critical stakeholders with. So I found, that the book has very a good list of things to consider when going to do that part of your commissioning process. Thinking of teams that I've worked with in this region, where they've been, after stakeholder mapping, identifying very diverse range of stakeholders. So they want to go and ask that stakeholder, why do you think we exist? So how are we part of your success, your current and, in desired future success? What is it that you need from us? And so one team comes to mind that worked from meeting the regulators in their industry all the way down to meeting the side of the street traders who use their products to make something that they will then sell on to casual laborers. And what really struck them was that everyone had feedback. No matter, what feedback, obviously from your customers and from your suppliers, you're quite used to getting some feedback, or should be anyway. But I think what also struck them is that desire to partner, which they had never envisaged before. They were very shocked, for instance, that the regulator was just waiting for them to approach. And the regulator was saying, we really have so much to learn from you. And how can we work closer together? And they never thought that could be the relationship they'd have with someone like a regulator. And the other thing that process throws out is opportunities for the client team to look at innovations that would speak to the needs of different stakeholders. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank
Yeah.
you. You've sparked off the whole emphasis on partnering.
Yes.
We put a lot of emphasis in the book on moving from a customer supplier. It's so easy to slip into, well, we're here to deliver a result, because an awful lot of coaching and consulting, well, consulting is about delivering results, but coaching is more about working together. And so we put a lot of emphasis on how we shift from that customer supplier to, as you're saying there, building a partnership and then learning together. The core learning is, how do we learn together, not just internally, but with our stakeholders. So yes, lovely. Thank you for reminding me of that aspect, which is really crucial.
Yeah, and it's not just customer supply, it's us, them, isn't it? It's that sense you're blowing up this projection about, oh, they won't want to talk to us, or we're too scared of talking to them because they may make us feel whatever. I like your approach, supporting the team in collecting its own data. I think can be very, very powerful if they're ready to do that with the right mindset. That's very good. Good.
So our
what other questions?
The other questions we were hoping that you might say something. It's because we've talked a lot there in our bit about developing ourselves as a systemic team coach, and just, it'd be interesting to hear. I mean, obviously you've both done the systemic team coaching program, so you're developing from that. But what is it that you've developed in yourself? How have you developed and learned as a result of the book and the programs?
Okay, one segment of the book about potential traps. That one I found it very, very useful in developing myself. I think for me, because I didn't start on team coaching until in the last 2-3 years. So fairly new in this. But those potential traps keep showing up. So when I read the book and I saw the chapter, oh my, this is spot on, and I found myself, whenever I feel that way, like for example, that, oh, I have to go and work with difficult people or something, I go back to the book. What should I do about this? And start reflecting on how I want to show up and how I may want to get the team leader or the team to engage the difficult people instead of myself. So very thankful for that part of the book. Yeah, for myself. Thanks.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Yeah, very, very similar. I think the book gives you those really great starting point of some key models, right? So the fundamentals of the 5 discipline model, as well as the Cider approach, and how you're going to interweave those. But what it taught me as well, and I think this has been a journey, is to hold those models lightly, because you've got to show a lot of flexibility in the approach. So you take, it's going to be different for every client, where in the disciplines they need to start. And also, I think you just mentioned earlier around being very aware of the impact that you're having on your team system. So your own presence. Yeah. And there's a great section in the book that talks about your competencies as a systemic team coach and what you need to consider to really hold that space with courage sometimes to let the tension sit there, don't run away from it, and that only through that process, knowing that you can create some impact with the client. So it's not always comfortable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it needs not to be comfortable, doesn't it? It's really important that we notice those moments of discomfort and help the team use that as a point of learning. If we can't hold their feet to the fire, as it were, we're not going to help them learn to the utmost. We're not there to smooth things over.
Yeah.
No.
we're there to help them learn from the difficulty.
Mm,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really great to hear your stories.
yeah. And I think that's the challenge. I find that too, that especially getting teams or maybe the team leader to step up to challenge, especially challenging or questioning or demanding from a senior team, and helping them do that without a load of emotion and baggage. And so I need to manage that myself, the anxiety of speaking to someone in power. And how do we manage that sense of respecting the other person and their senior role, but not kind of suppressing? And that's uncomfortable. And we have to learn to manage that and stay with and recognize the discomfort of that in the relationship.
And also recognizing that sometimes that feeling that we're being deferential may be in the system. I remember a time when I noticed I was being more deferential than usual to the senior leader, and then I realized actually it was because it was such a hierarchical organization. Everyone was treating the team leader as the kind of god in the system, and recognizing that what we're experiencing is also systemic.
Mm.
Learning from the system in that regard. Yeah, all about partnering, really important. So are we now at the time when we need to open up the system? So thank you so much, Madeline and Yvonne, both for reading the book and using it, and then of course for being being so willing to talk about it. That's really, really helpful.
But he says here, is the systemic approach that we're proposing accepted worldwide, or do cultural differences, African, Asian countries, hide challenges in the people's acceptance, or do of any of the specific points in regard to systemic team coaching? So it's really speaking to what extent does this model travel in different cultures. So really fantastic to hear from you, Madeline and Yvonne, how you've adapted it, or elements that stand out in one culture versus another.
I'm happy to go. Obviously, when we say African, we're more than 50 countries, and we got to be first very cognizant of that every country's culture is different. But what I've actually found, and then within each country, I'm sat right now in Nairobi, there's 40 different languages in Kenya. But what I've found interesting is actually the organizational culture is sometimes more different than you'll find the differences between neighboring countries' culture. So working in a very traditional, to your point, Hilary, working in a very traditional government entity, you are really conscious of some of the power dynamics that perhaps going on in the room, compared to a multinational, fast-moving consumer good, where there's really no hierarchy, there's no titles, there's no suit and tie. I think the first thing, and this you speak about in the book, is what is the smell of this place? And is this the sort of environment that I'm going to be able to do my best work? And there's certainly a very important component here of contracting and being very honest with my clients, saying, I'm going to be here to challenge you. Yeah, I'll be here to, I'm here in service actually of your stakeholders. I quite explicitly start there and say, I'm not here just for the internal workings of the team. And secondly, I'm here to challenge you to be creative. Now, that's where some differences do arise. So in Uganda, extremely creative, visually verbal, so lots of metaphors. And then in other cultures, for instance, if you're trying to use visualization techniques, you'll really struggle. Or if you're trying to have some serious play, I use sculpting with Play-Doh and things, and then there'll be certain organizational cultures who also say no. They say, what are you trying to do? But if you've contracted for it, that's great. And I think also to know yourself and as a white East African, knowing I'm a bit of an anomaly, it's hard for people to put me in a box, which is great, because it allows me to be a bit of a lone ranger and to shoot at a lot of misconceptions that people might hold. What about you? Curious about in your market, Yvonne.
Okay, so Asian, and I'm working in a hospital, and hospital it tends to be hierarchical as well. But I think what I'm thankful is for my organization, we believe a lot in collective leadership, which is what is mentioned in the book as well. How do we do that? And I think initially when we started with team coaching, some of them do look to us to say, hey, can you be the one providing the answer? And they will also be thinking whether do I just answer to the leader or am I working with the whole team? But I think as they experience the work that me and my team do, they realize that we're not just working with the leader, but working with the whole team. In the way we gather our data, ask about what they need and so on. And yeah, and most recently, you know, starting to work, go outwards towards the stakeholders. So it takes a while for them to be used to this way of working with us. But I think by now, that they're very used to us. Yeah. So that's my experience. Mm.
And thank you very much, because one of the next question is there about working in public sector, or I'm assuming that your healthcare institution has a very public aspect. And the question is, do you experience more resistance and challenges in public sector? I think, Madeline, you were beginning to talk about, you know, your work in government institution.
And working with variety, so from central banks to capital markets authorities. And if you're going to try and move the needle even 1 degree in those entities, what you need to be doing is actually getting the most senior sponsorship you can get. So the moment they realize that this is something that the person in charge is really passionate about, then I think the fellowship falls in place for you. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious about Vinicio's question, actually, because I'm curious as to why, Vinicio, you believe it's going to be more challenging to work in this way in public sector. I don't experience that myself, and I have experienced the power of working in this way and helping the team then have different types of partnering conversations with its stakeholders has been huge. So I mean, I suppose what we're saying is, if we're open to the system and really understanding the wider system in which a team works, then we are inevitably adapting our approach according to different cultures. And so it should be applicable, because we're being respectful of cultures that the team works within.
And it's always an interesting one. What is happening when we experience resistance?
Yeah.
Is that just they're not doing it the way I want them to do it, you know, and they haven't then found the way. I tend to always challenge myself when I hear, I feel that the client is being resistant. I think, well, maybe I'm not finding the way in. I'm not understanding the language. I'm not approaching this in a way that the team can understand. So I think certainly in my supervision, I'm always challenging the team coach to be finding a different entry point so that they're not hitting up against this resistance.
Yeah, indeed. To help the team work out, are they a team? You know, do their stakeholders need them to be a team? Because sometimes teams, you know, teams of specialists have their own agendas, don't they? And they may well be outward facing in applying their own expertise, and may not see the value of co-working. But it's not for us to decide whether they are teams. It's really for them to explore whether their stakeholders need them to work together collectively in a way that they can't achieve when they're working apart. So yeah, it's a very rich question there.
Surely all team coaches do that. It's really interesting if you read the books and look at the various courses that are available. Their teams are usually focused internally, and they're systemic in terms of how do we, the system of the team. When they call it systemic coaching, they're looking at what's going on internally in the internal dynamics, not so explicitly as we do is what are the stakeholder interventions. And I think, Yvonne, you talked about the stakeholder map, or one of us talked about a stakeholder map, which I think is very central to the whole notion. And one of the first things we do is who is the team, who is inside the team, and then who are all of the elements. Now, I don't see that anywhere else in any of the courses that I've seen available, or apart, very rarely in the books. So I think it is a message that's coming through now, but I don't, you said, I thought is that any sensible coach should take the whole environment into account as a given. What do we think? Is it, it's not my experience.
I think it's really about how you take it into account, because I think sometimes we as team coaches can feel, okay, we've now attended to the wider system. So, we've done the initial stakeholder inquiry, we've fed that back to the team about what the stakeholders need of the team. But how do we keep that alive, and how do we keep our focus on the connections, not just within the team, but the connections between the team and the outside world, right through to the end of the work? I think that does require us to be very consciously focusing on the outside in. Yeah, you're nodding, Madeline.
Yes, because I'm also an assessor for the International Coach Federation. If you look at their 8 competencies, and nowhere is it asking you, okay, yes, considering competency 7, raising self-awareness, you've got something around looking at it in a broader perspective, but it's one of the behavioral indicators. And so nowhere when you're coaching a one-on-one, are you called upon to be really systemic? I mean, if you are, that's fantastic, but actually it's very person-centric rather than system-centric.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it'll become superfluous one day. Yeah, don't think net yet.
And I think we're moving that. We're out ahead here in less chartered territory, but I think, yes, it will definitely become the norm. Because we have to think systemically, and of course we've been through, COVID and climate change, so all of these massive environmental influences that are affecting organizations in major ways. So now we are becoming much more aware of the wider, the extra, even outside the organizations.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the possible responsibility of us as coaches to hold up that mirror. How are you contributing to the survival of the planet, etc.?
Is it not both person and system centric? Absolutely. I think we're just trying to emphasize that we are expanding the usual way. The internal team dynamics way is the team centric, and we are emphasizing the stakeholder centric approach. Yes, and helping everyone to thrive, of course, and the organization to thrive, and society. We keep going further and further out, and you'll see we're a member of B Corporation, which is very much about how do we create a better planet, a better business. And so constantly attending to our impact on the environment and our impact on society is a key part of the AOEC strategy. What advice would you give me to get started in team coaching? Well, Madeline, Yvonne, I mean, you're closer. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, so you're closer to that edge. I've forgotten what it's like to get started. It's like, Yes.
Yvonne, what do you think? You said 2-3 years. So what got you started?
Okay. I think for my organization, because the teams are really working in various different places, so bringing them together is very essential. But how to start from, let's say, one-to-one coaching to coaching a team, I guess is when you're coaching the leader, at some point you realize that you probably need to coach the team as well, meaning to coach them together for the team to be even more effective. And I guess that's oftentimes where we start. Coach the team and coach the leader together. And yeah, the results will be a lot better. So
go with imperfect action on this. It's going to be really messy. You're going to think you have a plan, but this is from one of my supervisors in the systemic team coaching world, and just realizing that if you could be messy and creative in front of the team, that allows them to be the same. So just go in there and have fun.
Yes, don't let the need for perfection get in the way of good team coaching. I think the other thing is to look at your own network, your own professional network, and see who you might partner with. But I mean, of course, that's a really important decision, because you need to have a robust conversation about how you can partner transparently in a rich and learning way, and also think about this is going back to the book, but at the back of the book there are questionnaires that can be used when talking with the team leader and the team and stakeholders, particularly the team leader. Based on the 5 disciplines model, start introducing some of those questions into your relationship building conversations with your clients, and see how that lands, and then take the conversation forward. How might these questions land with your team? Just start exploring what the issues are and what potential the interest is in the client systems you work for, thinking more collectively rather than one-to-one would be my view.
Yeah. Yes.
thank you.
As you said, just asking the questions and getting thinking what's going on externally.
Yes, it can be very messy and exploratory and emerging, and you know, when it gets messy, that's the place where we can learn most. So that's where we need our feet firmly on the ground and our breathing calm, so that we can stay with that.
And there's one here about constellations. We don't cover constellations because it's a very specific technique that requires a very careful management. And generally, when I was involved with Bert Hellinger, who developed the whole family constellations some 20 odd years ago, I brought Bert Hellinger to the UK. So I studied with him about it, and it has a very clear structure, but it's very much a hierarchical structure within families. So the translation to organizations is more complex, and there are lots of people who have now done that, but it's a very specific technique that you can use, and very separate. So we don't cover constellations as a technique in the book, because you're a completely different role. You're more like an orchestrator, a conductor of a system rather than a coach. Excellent work, brilliant to do, but you have to find the right time, prepare the team, and it's very different.
And we distinguish that, John, don't we, from sculpting, which is more about how you embody yourself in relation to others.
Yes.
But I think one area that can be confusing is there is a book called Systemic Coaching and Constellations, which is about using constellations as a tool in supervising one-to-one coaching and as a tool for reframing your own one-to-one coaching.
Yes.
It's a slightly different thing.
Yeah. Yes. We've got the questions, some questions about the next step, where Hilary and I are running a systemic team coaching certificate program in July. I'll be with Yvonne in November, but that's a closed group. So unfortunately, if you're from Singapore, you might we might meet up and have a coffee and talk about it. Our colleagues in Renewal Associates also have public programs elsewhere. And I don't know what's happening down in Kenya. Madeline, are you running anything yet face to face?
We are not well, we used to do face to face with you, of course, John, pre-COVID, but now we are having our participants from this part of the world actually join in the global cohorts with the Academy of Executive Coaching, the virtual programs, which are really fantastic. I can see Christine from our recent one. I think she's sitting in South Korea. So nice to see you again, Christine. And it really, I think there's so much richness because there's literally participants from every corner of the world, and we're learning from each other through that certificate.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Well, I
Thank
think
you.
that's our time. It's 1 o'clock in the UK anyway. I keep thinking that it's completely different time elsewhere.
Top of the hour.
Yes, top of the hour. Yeah. Lovely. Well,
5
thank
p.m.
Yeah.
So-
Hi, Emma.
you. That's really appreciated. It's great being here, and thank you everybody else for joining.
Yes, thanks everyone.